All right, here we go. Welcome, everybody, to the June 9th work session of the City Council. Mayor Piercy is again in Vancouver for a rail summit, and so I'll be sitting in for her as council president. We have two issues on the table today, and first up is West 11th setbacks, as I understand it. So I'll turn it over to staff for presentation to start.
Rob?
Council President, I'm Rob Interfeld, Transportation Planning Manager, and the quick overview is that the city is working with LTD to plan for extending MX to West Eugene, and part of it is likely to end up on West 11th Avenue. The city requires that new buildings be built close to the street, and there's a concern that additional development could constrain the ability to effectively locate MX on West 11th. And so we're here today to suggest a solution to prevent additional encroachment. As you all know, we've been working with LTD to plan for this extension of MX into West Eugene. We're going to be back here on June 23rd for the next update on that process, and a number of you are involved in the process in different ways. And actually tonight at the library, there's an open house for the West Eugene MX process. West of Chambers, West 11th Avenue is one of the potential alignments for West Eugene MX. And west of Seneca Street, West 11th Avenue is the only potential alignment for West Eugene MX. Currently, the city's land use code requires that new buildings in commercial zones be located within 0 to 15 feet of the front property line, basically the right-of-way line. And this approach to development can conflict with future corridor enhancements to West 11th and other streets. Furthermore, locating buildings at the back of the sidewalk is practicable and desirable in downtown Eugene and other pedestrian-scale business districts where there is generally a parking lane that serves as a buffer between traffic and pedestrians on the sidewalk, where there's lower vehicle speeds, and where there's wider sidewalks with street trees. However, this approach has created unintended consequences on a major arterial like West 11th, where where the sidewalk is curbside, where there's few street trees, where there's no on-street parking buffer, and where there's considerably higher vehicle speeds. And so what I'd like to do is just show you some examples of some recent development on West 11th and also on Coburg Road that just gives you a sense of what I'm talking about. So this is the Walgreens that was recently built on Coburg Road, and you can see how it's built right up to the back of the sidewalk right there. And this next photo gives you a better sense of that, if I can get to it. Let's see. There we go. It's a little dark, but you can see there's a big truck kind of blowing by there, and there's the wall of the Walgreens on the right. So as a pedestrian, it's not a very comfortable place to be. And of course, if the city and LTD decided to put MX on Coburg Road, there's no room to expand the right-of-way right there with the Walgreens right up against the back of the sidewalk. And then just a little further down Coburg Road, this is you can see the Walgreens right there. This is a relatively new Liberty Bank building. So again, there's not really room to expand the right-of-way for MX, but at least there's. And I don't know how this came about, but at least there was a planting strip put in. So if that big truck were blowing by, at least it would be a more comfortable environment for pedestrians. So now let's move on to West 11th. Here's some new development. These are liner buildings that were put in front of the Office Depot, and you can see how they were built right to the back of the sidewalk, again encroaching on the right-of-way, or right along the right-of-way line. Another view of the same development. And so I'm going to move on in the presentation. What I'd like to do now is just talk a little bit about West 11th itself. West 11th is a major arterial street from Garfield to the west. East of Garfield, it's a minor arterial. And between Garfield and Bailey Hill Road, the right-of-way is generally 80 feet in width. And further to the west, the right-of-way widens out to around 100 feet. But again, it varies. And city standards call for planting strips with street trees on arterial streets. But as can be seen in the following photos, there are practically no street trees on West 11th. And outside of the Commerce Street area. In some cases, there's not even sidewalks. There, we actually did find, when we went out to take photos, there were a couple street trees. So this is the Commerce Street area, which is a more newly developed area where the city standards had changed by the time this area was developed. So there are street trees in this area, more of setback sidewalks. However, in Eugene, we do have a tool for establishing a future right-of-way on a street, and we call it a special setback. These are identified on the adopted right-of-way map in the arterial and collector street plan, and currently the adopted right-of-way map for West 11th, currently the adopted right-of-way for West 11th between Garfield and Bailey Hill Road is only 80 feet, which pretty much mirrors the existing conditions. And west of Bertelson, the adopted right-of-way is 100 feet, also more or less mirroring the existing conditions. And in between Bertelson and Bailey Hill Road, there is no adopted right-of-way. So our recommendation is that we move forward with amending the right-of-way map to be consistent with something similar to this drawing, around 110 feet. And this would provide room for MX lanes and an adequate pedestrian realm with street trees. But keep in mind, this would only affect future development and would not have any impact on what's out there currently. And if there was a decision not to put MX on West 11th, at a future date, the council could decide to bring the right-of-way back in closer to where it is today. But like I said, the recommendation from staff is to amend the right-of-way map, something closer to what you see up there, so that we don't continue to get development on West 11th that sort of hinders the ability to have MX out there with additional lanes. Before we open this up for council discussion, I would like to point out some related upcoming activities. Transportation planning staff will be coming back to council on July 12th to present the West 11th Avenue Transportation Corridor Study, which is certainly related to what we're talking about today. And also, to the extent that the council is interested in pursuing these kinds of issues on other corridors, that is something that we can do through the Transportation System Plan update, which is something that we'll be initiating soon.
Does this relate to WEC at all?
And yeah, this city manager asked, is this related to the WEC? And I expect that's something that Councilor Pryor will bring up. But this is something that was recommended by the West Eugene Collaborative, that we address this issue because they saw that buildings are being built at the back of the right-of-way line on West 11th, and that could hinder the ability to add MX lanes on West 11th.
Okay. Well, wonderful. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. What we want to do here, we have a motion that Betty will put on the table here in a little bit, but we want to have a discussion on this first. So Chris gets to jump in the queue first. Go ahead.
Thank you.
He's going to do that. Thank you, George.
What I'm going to send around is a copy of a letter that the West Eugene Collaborative sent to the council back in 2008, so you can have it for reference. I think it's important in this conversation to talk about the fact that recognizing that West 11th is and will be and continue to be a major corridor was fundamental to what the WEC talked about. But it's important to also know that the WEC was not making recommendations that big changes happen right away. I want to be absolutely clear that what we're talking about doing today is, I think, important to preserving options for the future. But it's also important to talk about what the decision today is not, because I think it could easily be confused. What it is not is a guarantee that West 11th is going to be the MX corridor that's going to be selected. I mean, this could easily be interpreted as, MX is going to go down West 11th. They're doing that to make that happen. That decision is still up in the air. This simply preserves the ability for MX to be on that corridor at some time in the future if that's what's chosen. But this is not a decision that this is the corridor for MX. A second thing that this is not is a prelude to demolishing buildings. Nobody's building is going to be torn down. No businesses are going to have their front ends removed as a result of what we're doing today. I think there's a general acknowledgement that what has happened up to this point has been what's happened up to this point, and it's in my opinion, it's unfortunate, but it's not something you're going to go back and start tearing buildings down to correct. The West Eugene Collaborative, when they talked about this, talked about it in terms of the longer-term development, that this may take 20 years in order to get to their ultimate recommendation, but not in a way that involved demolishing things. It also is not a prelude to widening the street in any immediate future. You're simply preserving the ability to have that right-of-way, but nobody's proposing to come in here and take that 80-foot street and widen it out to 110 feet or 100 feet or any wider. This is simply to put in place the mechanism to preserve the right-of-way, not to tear anything down, not to start widening the street, not to put MX buses on it. And I want to be real clear that that's not what this is. But it is very important that we preserve this right-of-way, because if one more building gets built on West 11th that's pushed right up against the sidewalk, it's going to take what's an unfortunate situation and make it worse. So really the discussion today is to try to stop that and to be more thoughtful about the kind of right-of-way you may need for the future.
Okay, thank you. George Poling and then Betty.
Yeah, I'd just like to say that in September of 2002, when then Mayor Tory assigned me to the Covert Grove Corridor BRT stakeholder group, the discussions we had then, are you still there?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. One of the discussions we had then was the difficulty that was faced because building codes required that the buildings be right there on the sidewalk. And in that discussion that we were having back in early part of 2003, I made the observation and comment that because of our building codes at the time, we had to do it this way. So, and I suggested a long time ago when we first started talking about the West 11th corridor that we perhaps look at temporarily putting a moratorium on the building codes. So, I appreciate the motion here, and it is a temporary fix. I don't want it to be a permanent thing. It's just that in the event, I stress that EMX does go down West 11th, I don't want to see anybody that has developed the building now, between now and then, have to get it torn down. But it still gives the property owners the ability to make some improvements with their property, knowing that I can build it out to this far instead of out to the current sidewalk and not have to worry about it. So I appreciate the motion coming out, and I think this is a good thing for everybody involved in the future.
Thank you, George. Betty?
Thank you. George just mentioned moratorium, and that was something I wanted to ask about. Do we have to amend the street right-of-ways now, or could we just have a moratorium on building up to the sidewalk? I think it would be less upsetting and threatening to people if we just did the moratorium.
My understanding is that it's a lot simpler to amend the street right-of-way map. It's not a land use action that way.
So we're doing that because it's simpler.
It's also, it doesn't necessarily have any more of an adverse impact on property owners or development to do it that way.
One of the issues that we talked about when staff came to our office to talk about options, right now the setback that applies is citywide. Mm-hmm. So it would take, if you just wanted to deal with these particular stretches of highway or of road, you'd need to amend the code, the setback provisions, so they would apply just in these areas, or have it apply citywide, which I don't think is the intent. The street right-of-way map shows intended future right-of-way. It doesn't actually take any property and make it right-of-way. It's what we intend in the future for the right-of-way to be. And it's a much more direct way to get at this particular issue.
Okay, I understand that, but I still think it's going to be seen as a threat of MX coming. But then my next question is, the places that already come up to the sidewalk, we are not going to tear them down, but what if they want to remodel instead of letting the building fall down in 20 years? Would they be able to remodel and without giving up the space that's by the sidewalk?
Steve Niesterman, Planning. In terms of the existing buildings, they would be allowed to remodel as long as they're not exacerbating the building coming closer to the street further. So, for instance, if they were doing interior remodeling or building up or building behind the building away from the street, all of that would be fine. The only issue this would affect with existing structures is if they were actually, say, continuing to build additional area within the setback.
Well, suppose they need a new facade, but it doesn't come any further toward the street.
Right. So remodeling of something that's, let's just, for argument's sake, call it legal nonconforming. If they're not worsening that effect, they could do those kinds of things. If they're making it worse, that would be a problem. So
Okay.
facade improvement presumably wouldn't make it any worse than it is already.
Okay, thank you. That's all.
Thanks. George Brown?
Thanks. So after Coburg Road was not chosen as a EMX route, and we did the no-build alternative there, did we do something like this for Coburg too? Because I think that's there's still the intent to have an EMX on Coburg at some point in the future, I believe.
So, yeah, and I think that's something we can tackle through the transportation system plan update. And I think also we have a more flexible approach to looking at MX now than back then. I wasn't around back then, but my understanding is it was sort of all or nothing. Either we have the dedicated transit lane or we don't have MX at all. And now I think there's a little more of a willingness to look at, we'll have dedicated lane, then we'll run a mixed traffic a bit, and then we'll have a dedicated lane. So,
my question is, I guess, did we expand the right-of-way, amend the right-of-way map for Coburg Road?
it was not amended.
No. It seems like we should probably think about doing this for Coburg as well as 99 and River Road, although it's not as much of a problem on either one of those, but I believe there's some structures, though, that are close and people could build up there.
I mean, I think the question is, do we wait? It's going to take a few years to do the transportation system plan update. So the question is, do we wait to work through that, or do we try to do something sooner?
Yeah. Well,
so we don't get more
and a lot of there's one under discussion now. I understand that.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if we had afterthoughts after when it fell apart for Coburg Road. We go, gee, maybe we ought to expand the right away out there because it's going to come back around in another 10 or 14 years.
Yeah, it's a good question. I can certainly look into talk to some folks who were around back then, and I can certainly share if there were any learnings from that experience.
Well, Councilor Poling might remember. He was in that group. Then I have another question. On this page of the AIS, page 15, it says, with or without the addition of an EMX route, it will be necessary to accommodate future transportation enhancements. On West 11th, what does that mean?
Well, at a minimum,
we didn't do. The EMX got stalled, or didn't happen immediately, or never happened. We just had a different type of bus service. What would that mean? What was the enhancements?
Well, one thing I was trying to show is at a minimum, we're recommending that at least we provide for a comfortable pedestrian realm on West 11th. So we don't know exactly what that would mean, but 12 to 15 feet from the curb to have a planting strip and the sidewalk. Because right now,
it's pretty bleak.
Yeah, you can see how bleak that is.
Stretches. It's just not.
Yeah.
It's really harsh.
Yeah. So that's mainly what I was talking about.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, I don't see anybody else. I'm going to put myself in the queue here and say, when I'm looking at this, the two travel lanes there, is this drawing built to scale of the city standard of 11-foot minimum travel lanes?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, all right. That'll be helpful for later. Does anybody else have a question? Chris?
Just maybe an answer to your one was in the West Eugene Collaborative Report for way out in the future was the conversation about a multi-way boulevard. And in order to put in a multi-way boulevard that does the rapid movement of people but still provide the availability and for folks to do more of the local traffic, you need lanes and lanes configured in certain ways. And they looked at the right-of-way that might be necessary, and it was approaching the kinds of things we're talking about today. But the West Eugene Collaborative recognized that in order to achieve a multi-way boulevard, that could be 20 years in the future because of all the other constraints that are already in place. So that's why you'd want to kind of have that space available.
George?
Yeah, I looked at the multi-way map, and it's beautiful, but I personally don't ever see that happening, because it looked like Europe, with the apartment buildings, and the environment is already built, and I'm real concerned about the property owners out there. They're just scared to death that they're going to lose their parking, they're going to lose their buildings, they're going to lose stuff, and some of them have already been moved once. And so I've sympathized with their concerns, and so basically, if we extend this right of way, anyone whose property is in that right of way, their property could be an eminent domain. They could lose the property that's their right of way. I mean, would be the city's right of way.
This action would only affect new development.
Only on new development.
Yes.
Good, thanks.
Andrea?
Well, I just wanted to comment on George's comments. So if you look past, like Fred Meyer, it's all open. There's very few buildings, and I know you're concerned with the short part of West 11th that has all the businesses, but there's a lot more of West 11th that to go to this kind of a that could actually support this kind of a theory, and so I think it's a good idea. And I always question, I don't think I was on council when, I don't remember if we were or not, when that building code passed to be so up close. But I personally didn't think that, I didn't understand what they were trying to do in that part of town. I can see downtown having like an overlay, but as far as, where there's a little bit more open space, I really didn't understand it, so I'll definitely be supporting the motion.
Okay, Betty, would you like to put the motion on the table, please?
I would love to. I move to direct the city manager to proceed with option A.
I second the motion.
We have a motion in a couple of seconds. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
George? All right. Do I get to vote at that?
Yes.
All right, good. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. All right, on to our second item of business today, which is the Walnut Station Mixed-Use Center and presentation.
Lydia will be making the presentation for us.
Thanks very much.
Mike was standing for butting in, but I'm going to have to disconnect and get back to my training session.
Thank you, George.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Lydia McKinney with the Eugene Planning Department, and I'm here to talk this afternoon about the Walnut Station Mixed-Use Center project. I know you've been hearing about this for a number of years, and we're very excited that it's being brought forward to Council for proposed adoption and implementation. I do have a brief presentation. I'll go over the background, talk about mixed-use centers and the Walnut Station project in the context of mixed-use centers. We'll go over the public engagement process for the Walnut Station project. And I'll also spend a little bit of time talking about traditional codes. We'll then move on to the implementation tools for the project, and we'll spend the bulk of our time talking about the new form-based code that we're proposing and the multi-way boulevard that we're proposing for Walnut Station. And then we'll finish with a brief overview of the adoption process. The Walnut Station Mixed-Use Center project implements our growth management policies, especially ones that have to do with maintaining our existing growth boundary, increasing density in appropriate areas while maintaining neighborhood compatibility. It's also, Eugene has an adopted strategy for addressing our state requirement to reduce vehicle miles traveled, VMTs. And Eugene's strategy in order to do that was actually to adopt what was called in transplant nodal development areas, and we're calling those mixed-use centers. It's the same thing. And this map, we're not expecting you to look at understand the detail of it, but this map is the adopted map in transplant, which shows the recommended or the potential nodal development areas, and Walnut Station is included in that. Oops. So just the context of the project, to make sure everyone's familiar with it, obviously this is the big boundary going around it. The Willamette River to the north, this is the Willamette Natural Area across the river. The boundary, the northern boundary of the project is to a large degree the existing mill race. The southern boundary is 15th Avenue, and that separates the commercial Walnut Station area from the Fairmont neighborhood, this well-established residential neighborhood to the south. The University of Oregon here is a partner and a neighbor, and then this here is the Riverfront Research Park. We know development is going to happen here, and we're already seeing, obviously, some significant development. This little building here, nearing completion, has made a big impact in terms of the urban form for the area. There's also, many of you may have noticed, the residential building that's going up behind Market of Choice. It's a 5-story multifamily building. There's also a 6-story building, residential with some commercial on the first floor that's permitted for 15th and Walnut. This area is also really well poised, we feel, for mixed-use development. We have a transit corridor here with Franklin Boulevard that we already have one MX line established. Again, we have this wonderful surrounding area. We've got this big employment center, and the University of Oregon is a neighbor and partner, well-populated residential neighborhood, great natural resources in the area. So again, we think this is really well poised to become an established mixed-use center. Let's see. Eventually, I'll figure out how to do this. Okay. So the public engagement process we've been working on this for a number of years, and we've had lots of opportunities and different ways for the public to participate and help direct us as we've come forward with this proposal. So just very briefly, we've had 5 open house events. We had our most recent one in December 2009 that was attended by 60 people. We've had numerous property owner meetings, one-on-one meetings with people. We've gone to the neighborhood and obviously participated with the neighborhood a great deal. We had a 3-day design charrette in April last year. We've gone to the Planning Commission numerous times, and the Planning Commission has obviously taken a very large role in making some recommendations and guiding staff, again, as we bring this proposal forward. We've done community presentations at the university, the public library. We've also had a stakeholders group, and this has been a very important and actually very instrumental in the past 18 months in helping us move this project forward. That stakeholders group has representatives from the City of Eugene, the Fairmont Neighborhood Association, the University of Oregon, and the Chamber of Commerce, representing local business owners. And the stakeholders group, unlike we had technical advisory committees who really got down into some of the details, but the purpose of the stakeholders group was really to have a forum to be able to talk about and mediate concerns amongst the different stakeholders. And we didn't always agree, but it was actually a really good forum for being able to have some of those conversations and bring everybody's concerns to the table and resolve those together. The other thing I'll just briefly mention is the AIA, that's the American Institute of Architects, did a peer review of the code for us I guess it's about 6 weeks ago now. So they reviewed that code, they tried to apply it in a couple of different places over a period of time, and then gave staff feedback about ways that we could make this work better, and we incorporated those changes into the draft that we brought forward to the council, to the Planning Commission, and you will be seeing shortly. Let's see. So all of this public engagement led to what was a very important part of this project, which was developing the vision for the Walnut Station Mixed-Use Center. This area was seen by many as having great potential as being a gateway to the city and also to the University of Oregon. I'll get this right. There we go. The idea of creating this area and this area becoming this vibrant, pedestrian-friendly mixed-use center was well supported. This is an image of Franklin Boulevard at the Walnut intersection, actually looking into the neighborhood. The idea of increasing density, but maintaining the character of Eugene, maintaining green spaces, big trees, and public places for people was also seen as a really important piece to this. protecting the neighborhood character. So the idea of increasing the density and having a different approach to commercial development along Franklin Boulevard was seen as important, but it was equally as important to all of the stakeholders that the Fairmont neighborhood, protecting that neighborhood, maintaining its character and livability, be addressed. That was a crucial issue for us. And we spent a lot of time talking about this 15th Street edge. And so again, this is an image of Walnut Street at 15th, so kind of the end of the road that you were looking at in the last slide. And then parks and open space were obviously important to the community and important components of the plan. This is an image of the mill race, and there was a lot of conversation about the potential of the mill race. That is the major natural feature that exists within the station area. And so making sure that we were able to address those needs in the vision was important. Okay, so I'm going to go into a brief conversation about traditional zoning codes. So the City of Eugene's code, like most codes across the United States, is based on a separation of uses, really. Our code is based on a type of zoning called Euclidean zoning, so it's use-based. And this was developed at the turn of the last century based on some real public health and safety issues, and so separating those uses made a lot of sense at that time. But now what we found is that we have resulted in this landscape that really has uses that are segregated. And then you often are required to use an automobile in order to be able to get from where we live to where we shop, work, and play. And so this image on the right, you know, the post-war housing boom, we're probably all familiar with residential neighborhoods that have one type of home on vast tracts. And jobs and retail will follow where the houses are, but not necessarily in a format that's neighborhood friendly. The other result we see often with traditional codes is that the type of development that results is unpredictable. So this here is a zoning code, zoning map like we have that says this is where your commercial neighborhood centers should be. But then in terms of the outcome, it can be developed as this, single-story, really auto-oriented type of development. Or it could also be developed as this, which is probably more consistent with what people would see as a neighborhood center. But our existing zoning codes don't give us the mechanism to have the conversation about what kind of places we're creating. I don't know why I can't get that. Form-based codes, on the other hand, are the definition. I'll just read quickly here. It's a method of regulating development to achieve a specific urban form. Form-based codes create a predictable public realm by controlling physical form primarily, with a lesser focus on land use. And what a lot of us really liked about form-based codes is form-based codes are about envisioning what a community does want, and then we reverse engineer that into the code. And of course, we are also interested in looking at preventing what we don't want. Form-based codes, there's different types of form-based codes, lots of different ways to approach this. They usually do regulate uses to some degree, and we certainly are doing that in Walnut Station. Design standards go only so far with regards to making sure the right kind of uses are located in the area. So we do have permitted uses, we also have prohibited uses, and uses that require a conditional use permit. So the Walnut Station form-based code, the map here on the bottom, the colored map, is the existing zoning map for the area. You can see this color is meant to be pink. That is most of the Walnut Station area zoned C2 community commercial. That allows 120 feet buildings. It has no setback requirements, large, broad scale of commercial uses permitted. The dark blue is public land. There's no development standards for public land, no building height requirements. And then again, this light yellow color is the single-family residential neighborhood, the Fairmont neighborhood here to the south. And so you can see that our existing situation is that we have no transition between this commercial 120-foot development ability and the R1 single-family neighborhood to the south. So this is one of the regulating plans that we're using in Walnut Station, and you can see that the colors change, and hopefully you can see that there's this dark purple area in the middle represents Franklin Corridor. So we have design standards and building height standards that are specific to the Franklin Corridor area that we see as the most intense development, where the highest amount of urban development would occur. And then as you move to the north and to the south, we transition into, to the north you transition to the mill race. So again, we have this transition area and then this gray color along the edge where the design standards become more appropriate to smaller scale residential type of development, and the building's heights step down to the mill race. And you have that same effect here on the 15th Street edge, where we've actually taken the building heights, stepped them down to 3 stories along that edge, and established a 10-foot setback requirement to better mirror what happens on the other side of 15th. So this is one of the pages from the form-based code. I actually have brought some copies with me. We like how skinny this code is. We haven't completely, this isn't disconnected from the Eugene code. This really is about the development standards, the building height, design standards, landscape standards. There's a lot of the Eugene code that still applies. Stormwater management standards from the code apply. There was underground utility requirements still apply. So it does still connect in many places to the code. But it is a new approach. You can see that there are graphics here. Our code is a lot of words. And this is the one page that talks about the development standards for the Franklin Boulevard corridor. So it talks about how the buildings are to be sited, the window articulation requirements, and landscape standards. And then this image also does a nice job of showing the step back. So along Franklin, again, the highest intensity area, the buildings are maximum of 7 stories in height, but they're actually required to step down to 5 stories as they come to the street edge. And that has to do with protecting the sun shade ability on one side of the street, and also to be able to open up to the sky, especially as you look towards that residential neighborhood. I'm going to talk about the Franklin Boulevard, multi-way boulevard, and I'll go through a series of images, and I promise I'm going to go through them in the right order this time. This is a picture of Franklin Boulevard in 2005, so the MX hasn't been established yet. And what I'm going to take you through is a series of photographs that shows how this will change over time. Yay, I did it. So this is the local access lane, and this is a really important component of the multi-way boulevard. The local access lane, what this does is it allows people who are not just traveling from point A to point B. We have those 2 lanes for the through traffic, but people can come off if they want to shop at these shops or frequent the businesses on the side of the road. It's a much slower travel lane. We can actually have bikes safely accommodated here, and it starts to set up this pedestrian realm, this sidewalk area that Rob was actually talking about. Here's some trees that are being planted and some additional landscape improvements. So you can start to see how that edge starts to. What's that?
Sorry, we're just taking a little aside, noticing that there are no parking meters there, and she was mentioning how that made me smile.
Yeah,
Anyway.
there's a couple more photos.
We haven't gone through all the slides yet, right?
No, but here's the last one. Maybe there are parking meters in there. It's hard to see. But
Sorry for the interruption.
we can add those.
You don't want to have a problem with this.
You can't tell if there are parking meters or not in this slide. So that's the final, the end of the photo simulation. And obviously, this is showing an ideal situation in the future where we've had redevelopment along Franklin Boulevard. We have this wonderful edge now where on Franklin Boulevard today, not many of us can imagine sitting out there and drinking a cup of coffee. But in this kind of situation, we could certainly see that happening. And it's important to know, with regards to what we're bringing forward for proposal to the City Council, we're bringing a form-based code and lots of amendments. I'll talk about that in a minute. But with regards to the multi-way boulevard, what we're trying to do here is establish the special setback to really maintain that option for the multi-way boulevard. We have done a lot of conceptual design. There's been a lot of modeling that's been done in earlier phases of the project to look at how this works and what the minimum right-of-way width needs are, but it is by no means a done deal with regards to the design. Again, as Rob was talking about, we really do want to establish the edges of what the right-of-way is by establishing the special setback. It's not about taking buildings down, and this would apply to new buildings that are being built, so to make sure that they are built in a way that still preserves that ability for us to do that in the future. This project, the Multi-Way Boulevard, has been on the United Front 2 years in a row, and it's something that Congressman DeFazio is very interested in, and he's also been seeking funding, and so we've been in conversations with his office and looking at other options for potential funding sources. So the adoption process, there will be a number of amendments necessary to implement this plan. So there'll be a Metro diagram amendment, a refinement plan amendment, actually a few refinement plan amendments, including the adoption of a new refinement plan for the Walnut Station Mixed-Use Center called the Walnut Station Specific Area Plan. And you actually received the text of that in your packet today. There'll be land use code amendments required. Adoption of the form-based code would be a land use amendment, and there's some other sort of technical amendments, and then a zone change. We're proposing to change the zoning of the properties within Walnut Station to Walnut Station Special Area Zone. The Planning Commission had a public hearing on April 20th, and they deliberated, finalizing their deliberations on May 24th, and they're unanimously recommending approval of the adopting ordinances. They had some recommended changes that staff have made, and again, we provided those to you in your packet today. Council is scheduled for a public hearing on June 21st, and then we're scheduled to have deliberations and action on July 26th. So that concludes staff's presentation. I'm available, obviously, to answer any questions, and I will stop messing around with this. Thank you.
You got to see it twice, though.
Frontwards and backwards.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Who wants to be first in today's questions? Okay, Chris. Not everybody at once here, though. All right. Okay.
Comments.
All right.
And I can be brief. This really is related to the previous discussion around, how do you get to the future you want without kind of hurting the present time that you're in. And I think we really want to be deliberate and kind of thoughtful about how we can do that. And I think we can absolutely get there. But I am very much impressed and excited about what this future could be. I mean, it really could be a great thing and something to aspire to, and whatever incrementally we need to do to help us get there in a way that doesn't overly impact where things are right now, as I think a possible thing to do and something we can be thoughtful about. So I think this is a good start, and it's a good beginning, if for no other reason than to help kind of preserve what your options are. But yeah, of course, I am very thoughtful about where things are right now and what businesses are and commerce and everything else, and making sure that we can try to do the best way we can to get there. So I think this is great. I love it.
Okay.
Where we're going to go.
Thanks, Chris. Andrea?
Yeah, I'm very impressed with this presentation. I like the way the future looks as far as Franklin Boulevard. It's kind of a stark street right now, even though there is a lot of pedestrian traffic on it. And I just look forward to it coming around. I did have a little bit of concerns when I heard that there was a 6-story building going into the corner of 15th and Walnut.
It's proposed, it's actually being permitted for over a year now. They haven't started construction. That is under our existing code.
Okay.
That would not be permitted under Walnut because, again, that's in that 15th Street transition edge.
My goal would not be to change the rules as we go along. I mean, if they've applied and they've been approved, then we need
and they are vested, right? We wouldn't
we do
change
have
that.
to respect them. So talk to me a little bit about the University of Oregon and how we're going to work with them. I mean, there's quite a bit of comment in the attachments about how we're going to do that. So if you could speak a little bit to it.
Sure. The university, as I mentioned, they're one of our stakeholders, and they've been at the table from the beginning. So they're very supportive of this project. They're supportive of the code and of the Multi-Way Boulevard. Some of the comments that they made at the Planning Commission had to do with compensation, which, because we're not purchasing the property at this time, that isn't part of that conversation, but the university would be treated as any other property owner and would be adequately compensated at that time when we purchased the property. I'm not sure if there was some specific questions you had.
No,
but
nothing specific,
okay.
Just the fact that they are at the table and there was talk of having to buy something from them is a little concerning, but this isn't free. And I really like the pictures, but they need to have parking meters.
I like the pictures like they are. Alan?
I agree, Andrea.
This has been a long-running process. It's been going on for a long time. I want to compliment staff, especially Lydia, on, in particular, very good process so far, a lot of good listening, especially the stakeholders, the UVO, the businesses, and the Fairmont neighborhood in particular. And that's been a great process, lots of workshops and open houses. I like the mixed-use concept as well, the walkable communities and the Franklin Multi-Way Boulevard. I went to school in Berkeley, and Shattuck Avenue is one of the examples of a really successful multi-way boulevard, and it works very well, and I lived that, experienced it, and lived right off of it, and it does actually do what people think it should do. And the mill race enhancements that are part of this plan are all great. My two concerns are around form-based code and about the impact of this plan on the neighborhood livability and protecting the neighborhood character as we've been describing it, and more specifically on that about traffic. The form-based code, this is our grand experiment in form-based code. Frankly, it makes me nervous. I would strenuously object to a pure form-based code, which said we don't have any land use regulations and conditional uses and things like that, but that's not what this is. This is a hybrid. Having been married to a planner, I understand about planning fads that go through the profession, and this one seems to be the latest planning fad. And I worry about that and its long term and how much it will impact our neighborhood and our city. For me, it creates some uncertainties around, especially with regard to livability and neighborhood protections. What the uses are do matter. It's not merely sufficient just to say, we'll regulate what the building looks like and that'll handle everything, and that's the essence of pure form-based code. I think we need to more clearly understand the negative impacts of this stuff and protect against them with regard to prohibited uses and more conditional use permits. And I think that needs to be strengthened, not weakened. The public involvement process in all of this is front-loaded. I find my experience with that is that it's actually doesn't mimic the reality of how people react to this stuff. People react to this stuff when it becomes real, not at the planning stage. When it becomes real, then people react to it. A good example is the Soonan neighborhood. For 50 years it was R4, but when it became real is when people started developing something there. That's when people start paying attention. So front-loading it is okay, but you need to have that other part there for it. So form-based code isn't there yet, and I'll need a second round.
Okay.
Isn't there yet for me.
Thanks, Alan. I put myself in the queue here. I know he's going to get to transportation because he mentioned that there. And one of my questions on this is about the travel lanes and the multi-way boulevard there, and why this deviates from the city standard of the minimum 11-foot travel lane width.
Well, it did until the Planning Commission made a recommendation to staff that the travel lanes be a minimum of 11 feet wide. So we've actually changed that. We had a diagram in the code here that showed the travel lane widths, that they are actually to be a minimum of 11 feet wide now. Are you asking why the original staff recommendation was for 11?
Yeah, and I wasn't aware that the revised version corrected that, so I apologize. My understanding was that it came out with the 10.6, so I was trying to understand that a little better.
Well, and that was, it was seen as something that was, and we had Public Works staff do a little bit of research looking at different travel widths for multi-way boulevards, and they do vary from, I think it was 10 or 10 and a half to 11, 11 and a half, 12 feet. So there is a range there. And we were trying to establish the minimum right-of-way width necessary. We also wanted to make sure there was enough room for sidewalks and medians, and so that's why we brought forward a proposal for less than what the city standard is, 10 and a half rather than 11 feet. But again, we did hear the Planning Commission was not comfortable with that either, and so staff recommendation has been changed according to that.
Excellent. Okay, that's my only concerns. And by the way, I wanted to say as well that I've heard from other people about how well this process has been managed. So congratulations to you for good work here and all the staff members who are working with you on this. I think this is the sort of thing that helps us get to a place where we're not fighting over dumb stuff. We're looking at the vision of what we want to create in our community, and I think that's a better way for us to plan and for us to work together. And I like the way this has come about with all the stakeholders as well. My only chief concern is about the fact that in a lot of these pictures, I have some challenge imagining Franklin looking like that one day as 34,000 new people move here or more, and that being one of the major travel lanes between Eugene and Springfield, that being the chief way to get through. I have a difficult time imagining we'll have less traffic going through that area, and I wouldn't want to see it become a bottleneck while we're trying to do the intelligent stuff on each side. So that was the concern that I had there. George Brown.
Thank you. Yeah, I've got some concerns about form-based code, too. It seems to become a mantra the last few years, and I need to learn more about it, I will admit. And I see you have the code itself, and that's online. What's it called?
It's called the Walnut Station Special Area Zone, and it is online, and you'll be receiving that. It's one of the attachments to the ordinance that you'll be receiving in your packet for the public hearing.
Okay, thank you. All right, I just have a few questions. This will only apply to new development, I assume, right? This will only apply to new development.
That's right.
Is there a maximum building height in the form-based code?
Yes, there is. So the maximum building height, that it changes depending on what area you're in, but it's 7 stories or 90 feet is maximum for Franklin Corridor, and then again there is that 15-foot step back. It's important that I should point out that there is also an alternative path process in the form-based code. So if a developer comes in and has a proposal for a building that's 95 feet or anything up to what the existing code allows, 120 feet, they can go through, we've actually created a design review process. So you can go through an alternative path, you can propose that to the planning department through a type 2 land use application, and as long as you meet the intent of the code and are consistent with those design standards, there is a way to get an approval for something that isn't
proper setbacks and so on.
And really, the focus is on that's consistent with the vision. So that pedestrian edge is very important.
Well, the reason I asked that, and the reason one reason I'm a little concerned about form-based code is because I see this area here as being a perfect place to throw up some tall buildings, especially on the north side of Franklin, because you're not going to block anybody's sun out, which has been one of the main complaints in Jefferson West Side and West University and SUNA is these huge bulking things being plopped down right in the middle of the neighborhood inappropriately. And then also, I'm a little concerned about reducing the parking requirements for this area too, especially if it's going to be a lot of people living there. I think people are still going to want to drive. That's another discussion, I suppose, but I'm also a little bit concerned about that. But I really see this as an area, this would be a great area. You could have like 3 or 4, 10, 12, 14, 15-story buildings in here, and it would be appropriate, and they could be placed in there so that it would look nice. It would add, and if the ones down below are 4, 5, 6, 7 stories, it'd be fine. But there would be, say I'm a developer and I buy a piece of property here and I want to build I've got a plan, I think I can sell or rent all the spaces in a 15-story apartment building. There would be a way for me to appeal.
No, it's not an appeal. To apply, you could go through a design review. You could apply for, it's an alternative path. So you can either meet this clear and objective standards of the form-based code and go straight to building permit. That was, streamlining the process. Or if you had an alternative, then you could go through this alternative path and get approval as long as you're consistent with the design review standards.
Okay, thanks.
Alan, round 2.
So the other concern that I have is around traffic. And the staff report on page 29 in particular says that staff, at the top of the page, second line down, staff does not find that development within the Walnut Station under the proposed plan will alter the traffic patterns. With the increased uses here and the increased intensity of the uses here, and without specific uses being identified because we're doing more form-based code, I'm hard-pressed to agree with that statement. In fact, I would disagree with that statement. As that becomes more like that picture there, I think that the traffic and the parking impacts in the surrounding area intensify. And I'm real hard-pressed to agree with that statement. What I think is needed here is this whole plan is very comprehensive, and I applaud you on that with regard to many parts of it until it comes to traffic. And the traffic portion of it is piecemeal. And it really needs to be in line with the rest of it, which is a comprehensive plan. What this calls for is traffic impact assessments on a project-by-project basis where the project then does the mitigation. Instead, what I think we need is a comprehensive plan that looks at the impacts, the spillover effects, creates a plan, creates the projects, and then creates a funding mechanism to implement all of that. We don't really do that here, and we don't have that kind of mechanism. Things like a reimbursement district, where it's kind of like an LID. They have them in other communities, where you pay into this bank or funding mechanism or district to then pay for those mitigation projects. I think that makes sense in this kind of context. So this piecemeal part about the traffic impacts just doesn't make sense when this is going to be a very comprehensive thing, and it's going to have a lot of spillover effects, especially with a full-blown build-out. The event parking district, that is a result of a lot of work that the neighborhood and myself did around the arena, I think is related to the arena, and it didn't really take into consideration the Walnut Station in particular, and it's insufficient to deal with the overflow parking impacts and the spillover and circulation patterns that occur because of the full build-out of the Walnut Station. I think we need to deal with that more comprehensively as well. And I agree with George. I think we should strive to get more alternative transportations and less cars, but I'm not sold on the simple premise that reducing the parking means people won't drive there. I think people still drive there. There's just no parking. And some will go into these alternatives. Two more quick points. One is I agree with the attachment B, the language that the Planning Commission alternatives, I think they work better for me. I think they're stronger. And in particular, only in the second round on this last one.
You can have a third round, as near as I understand, because this is kind of a super round in the words of John Borowski, because I don't know that anyone else wants to jump in just at the moment.
So the last point is this one about the university use, and that's Lydia, maybe you can explain what university use is after I make this comment, but that came up in the arena discussions and it comes up all the time around the university, because the university use is very ill-defined. And in this report, it says that we need to clarify that, which I think is a very, very good idea. I've actually pushed for that early on in this process. And because the university, basically, if I understand it, says that we can do anything, which is where that nuclear power plant idea came in, which is why it's now that was the extreme example of what university use meaning could lead to. So that's actually a prohibited use now, in particular. It's a little bit ironic, but yeah. But it's not too bad. But and I agree that we need to do that. The one part that's missing in this is that we need a timeline around that. That it just says we should do it. I think we should do it within a year, or some kind of timeline like that, and that the planning, maybe the more specific direction is that the Planning Commission look at this within the year, or something along the line, so it's not just open-ended like that.
Anyone else? Thank you, Lydia, very much, and staff, for all the hard work on this. Well done. And as I have it, that's the end of our meeting today, so we're adjourned early.
Great.
We can't do that.